We have also seen over the last 2.5 weeks an especially intense and trying time for America. I am outraged by the senseless and brutal killing of George Floyd. And we should all be proud that the vast majority of protests have been peaceful. Peaceful protest means that American freedom is working. And I'm also proud of the response of our National Guard forces, who provided excellent support to local law and state enforcement under the control of state governors in more than 30 states across the country. We never introduced federal troops on the streets of America as a result of the combined efforts of the National Guard and law enforcement at quelling the violence and de-escalating very, very tense situations. As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned, uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it.
This is Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley in the rare moment that a Trump administration official has expressed actual regret for participating in one of Trump's stunts. And that stunt was to have peaceful protesters gassed to clear the way for Trump to walk over to St. John's Episcopal Church so he could lift a Bible into the air for what he thought would be some iconic moment, and instead looked like this.
Holding up a Bible.
We have a great country. That's my thoughts.
But aside from the dystopian optics by Trump, there was also the optics of having military officials like General Milley show up in his camouflage utility uniform. He showed up dressed for battle, and given the fact that a battle is basically what was brought to these peaceful protesters, it was all the more inappropriate. And of course, what followed was a seemingly endless series of gaffes and lies by the Trump administration. Bill Barr claimed that tear gas wasn't used.
By the way, there was no tear gas used. The tear gas was used Sunday when they had to clear 8th Street to allow the fire department to come in to save St. John's Church. That's when tear gas was used.
There were chemical irritants, the part.
No, there were not chemical irritants. Pepper spray is not a chemical irritant. It's not chemical.
Pepper spray, you're saying, is what was used.
Pepper balls.
Right.
Even though he literally invoked pepper balls, which according to their own website are the quote, most effective chemical irritant available. Kayleigh McEnany lied that the protesters were violent even though video footage proved that they weren't. The administration said that the protesters couldn't be there even though they were moved at around 6:30, despite the fact that the curfew wouldn't take effect until 7. One excuse, one lie after the next, all in blind desperation to defend Trump's decision to use the National Guard to attack peaceful protesters for a photo op. Instead of conceding that this was the wrong thing to do, every single one of these officials is jumping through hoops and twisting themselves into pretzels to defend the president's authoritarian behavior. Because it's not about protecting our values, it's about protecting Trump. And so now, we wait to see if General Milley actually lasts a week in an administration where nothing less than total fealty to one man is the requirement. All for the apparent crime of saying that the use of military force against peaceful protesters was wrong. How's that for a controversial take? By the way, imagine someone saying that using military force against Americans is a bad look, and knowing that is a rebuke against Trump. What does it say about our president that someone could say something that obvious? Don't use military force against peaceful protesters? And the first question to come to mind is, when is this guy gonna get fired? Although it does seem that perhaps even Trump knows that this isn't a hill worth dying on. Even Lindsey Graham took to Twitter after General Milley spoke out, saying, quote, I have nothing but deep admiration for and total confidence in General Milley as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I support his statement in both substance and spirit regarding the recent presidential visit to St. John's. General Milley is a tremendous military leader who understands the long tradition of maintaining an apolitical, nonpartisan military. So whether Graham is actually siding with Milley or just trying to contain the fallout, the point here is that it's clear the consensus isn't in Trump's favor. Of course, that doesn't mean that other Republican senators aren't already spinning this rebuke by the general to benefit Trump. Senator Tom Cotton, the guy who infamously wrote a New York Times op-ed entitled "Send in the Troops," which is exactly as depraved as it sounds, said, quote, I know one thing General Milley regrets is that he was at the White House in his camouflage utility uniform. I know this, he is acting in the finest traditions of military leadership, and he is taking responsibility not just for the reality, but for perceptions. And if he thinks the perceptions reflected negatively on the commander-in-chief, all the way down to our young troops who were out in Lafayette Park or on the streets of Washington, D.C. last week, then he's going to take responsibility for it as a military leader, and I commend commend him for that, and we all should. In other words, Cotton is framing this as Milley taking all responsibility, and even for embarrassing Trump. Now, to be clear, whether Milley wore his camouflages or not wouldn't even be an issue if Trump didn't decide that he needed the photo op. So let's not pretend for a second that the root of the scandal is General Milley and not the president himself. The point here, aside from these stragglers like Tom Cotton who are content to anchor themselves to a sinking ship, is that we're seeing more and more Republicans finally willing to speak out against the president. And for a man who relies on power and numbers to cover for his corruption, it is looking more and more like the beginning of the end. If you like that video, please check out my brand new podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I'll cover the most important political stories of the week and interview major players in the world of politics. Available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out and subscribe now.